You see Farnoosh Torabi on CNBC, where she hosts Follow the Leader. She's a financial columnist for Oprah Winfrey's magazine, and her latest book, When She Makes More, 10 Rules for Breadwinning Women, has been a #1 bestseller on Amazon. Ms. Torabi was in town recently for the Springfield Public Forum, and she spent some time with us. We asked her about some of those 10 rules she says women making more than their spouse should be following.
So financially, I would say for couples where she is making more, to make sure that you are giving his money still some meaning. What can happen, I find, is that when there is someone who is making more or a lot more, the other person who is still bringing home a nice income, still has an important job, can feel slighted, can feel like their money is not supporting anything quite meaningful. So it's important as a couple to sit down and think about how we should allocate our money so that each person still feels like a real contributor. And as I talk about in the book, one of the rules, level the financial playing field. Even though there are disparate incomes, you're both bringing important money to the table and it should be respected. So that's one thing. The other thing I found, which is really fascinating amongst this particular subset of income earners, is that when she makes more, she does more housework than any other kind of income earning woman, whether it's compared to women who make less and compared to women who make as much as their male spouses. Women who make more do more of the housework, the brunt of the cleaning and cooking. And this is sort of the last frontier for couples. They argue about household chores more than sometimes their in-laws and money. So in the book, I talk about buying yourself a wife. It's a play on words, and it's meant to be...
Or a cleaning service,
Or a cleaning service. Outsourcing the things that you don't want to do or find is a waste of your time, because time, as I talk about in my work, should be appreciated and valued just as much as money. And there's even an equation in the book that will help you to figure out if it's worth it to outsource. Some people say to me, well, I would love to hire a cleaning person. I would love to outsource my laundry, but I feel as though it's a waste of my money. So there's even some math in the book that can help you come to a more technical conclusion if you need one.
Do you truly feel it's never too late then to start doing the things that can give you a financially secure life or retirement?
I do think that it would behoove all of us to take our finances seriously, and whether that is something that you realize in your 20s or your 60s, it isn't ever too late. Your money is important.
Your column in the November issue of O Magazine, fascinating, draws you in. You talk about being grateful and giving back to society, and, interesting twist, why you say it can be a financially good move for you. You'll do good by doing good. Explain.
And it's not just me saying this. The studies have now come out showing that when you practice gratitude, in other words, something as simple as writing in a journal what you're grateful about every day, or just giving thanks and being more conscious of the people and the resources that you have in your life that support you. I think it's very easy to forget those things because you might have bad days. We all have bad days. You might have bad years. And so it's really easy to have those negative experiences overshadow what is otherwise a really healthy and fulfilling life. And recognizing that in even a small scale way can not only make you feel better about life, but also it can improve your finances. Because what studies have found is that when people feel good about the present, they feel even better about the future. And when you care and feel good about the future, you want to preserve that future. You want to nurture that future. And much of that comes down to affording it and doing the right financial moves to do that. So people who are more fulfilled and feel grateful are more careful, in other words, about their spending. They're not impulsive shoppers, generally speaking. And so if you need to find an excuse to give thanks or be thankful and show gratitude, maybe this is your excuse now.
Got to ask you, in a somewhat different vein, you were there covering Wall Street 2008 when things cratered. We entered the Great Recession, vastly oversimplified, caused largely by collapse of the housing market. But couldn't it be seen and predicted that was coming because of the way mortgage loan money was really being thrown at often very unqualified borrowers? Then the risk, all bundled up, sold to the other big investors, leading to their ultimate collapse. I'm no financial genius by any means, and there was a sense for me that we're riding on top of a bubble. It had to be felt to some extent, and yet it seemed inexorable. We couldn't stop it.
Right. Well, you have to also remember at that time, people were making a lot of money. And I think that was overshadowing the reality, which was that this is extremely risky. And I think that the average American probably didn't feel it, but depending on where you lived, depending on the kind of job you have and the perspective that you had, you might have seen things that others didn't. But that collection of people and experiences, just they weren't coming together. And there were definitely people who predicted it, but their warnings were falling on deaf ears because at the same time, the psychological, behavioral tendencies that we have as humans, which is to follow the herd, believe some things are too good to be true when they really are. And I think that unfortunately got to the best of us. But I hope that going forward, we're more careful and we're more attentive to those warning signs.
Well, in that vein, our own Senator Liz Warren talks about it a lot. She was in the financial field, then created a consumer protection agency that the Senate Republicans blocked her from heading, as the president wanted to do. But really, besides Dodd-Frank, has very much really been done, do you think, to prevent a repeat of 2008? Do you feel better about our institutions and markets today?
I definitely think that if anything has changed, from my perspective, it's you and I and Americans hopefully have become a little bit more aware of the dangers of falling into traps and doing things hastily and being able to recognize when something is too good to be true. And more importantly, we're talking about money in a way that we never really did before. We're being very transparent about the things that we do know and don't know, and we're demanding reform, and we're being very public and loud about that. And we have Senator Warren, who is just a staunch advocate for the consumer, and I think that is the silver lining to all of this. Who knows what lies ahead, but I feel confident in the American consumer because not to say that our literacy has necessarily improved, but we definitely are more curious, we're more skeptical, and we're voicing more of what we want. And some of the innovation that we have seen since the collapse is very, very uplifting as well. While the big banks and the big institutions are trying to restructure, and that can take time. In the meantime, in the wreckage, we also saw a lot of the birth of innovation, young companies driven by consumer demand, coming up with innovative tools to help you get loans maybe easier, better, saving money in a more sort of friendlier way. And the focus on consumers has never been greater, and making sure that they are happy and satisfied and getting their questions answered. We're seeing that a lot at the startup level right now, and these startups could then become, the big institutions that we rely on and that we know of today.
Farnoosh Torabi, thank you so much for coming in, spending some time with us.